Most men go through life craving validation from women, constantly adjusting themselves to win favor, approval, often without realizing the brutal truths hidden beneath the surface. These are truths women know, feel, and act upon, yet rarely, if ever, say aloud. Why? Because to speak them would shatter the illusion of equality in desire, emotion, and respect. In this video, we'll break the silence. We're going to expose what most women will never admit, but use every day when interacting with men. If you've ever been confused, betrayed, or undervalued in relationships, this is the reality you need to hear. Stay till the end, because the final truth will flip everything you think you know about how women truly see men. The modern man is drowning in the illusion that goodness will earn him respect, loyalty, and love. He is taught to be agreeable, emotionally available, and to make others feel safe. But what no one tells him, what women will never say out loud, is that attraction is not born from goodness. It's born from power, not the power of domination or cruelty, but the quiet, unshakable power of a man who knows who he is, what he wants, and refuses to seek external validation. This truth is deeply uncomfortable because it contradicts everything mainstream culture teaches men about relationships. From childhood, boys are praised for being nice and punished for being assertive. They are trained to be passive, told that vulnerability is strength, and conditioned to believe that if they just love hard enough, they will be loved in return. Meanwhile, the men women are magnetically drawn to operate under an entirely different code. One of self-prioritization, silent strength, and emotional distance that doesn't come from playing games, but from being fully absorbed in their own mission. Women are biologically and psychologically wired to seek the most capable protector and provider, not in the traditional sense of money or brute force, but in the deeper sense of a man who cannot be swayed, whose presence speaks authority, and whose self-worth is not negotiable. This is the kind of man who does not ask for attention, does not beg to be chosen, and does not crumble under the pressure of emotional expectation. He exists in a state of internal equilibrium. He is not trying to be good, he is trying to be whole. And in that wholeness, he becomes irresistible. Women are emotional creatures, highly attuned to power dynamics, whether they are conscious of it or not. A man who centers his actions around pleasing a woman, who hesitates to lead, or who constantly seeks her reassurance unconsciously communicates weakness. This is not weakness in character, but weakness in orientation. He orients himself toward her instead of toward a mission, an ideal, or a purpose that is greater than her. This misalignment turns into emotional repulsion over time, though most women won't say this directly. Instead, they'll say he's too nice, too available, too soft. But what they're really feeling is the absence of tension, polarity, and edge, and attraction dies without it. Ironically, the men who seem the most unbothered, detached, and unavailable often become the most chaste. Not because they are inherently better, but because their lack of need for approval signals status. They move with calm confidence, speak with measured authority, and listen more than they speak. They aren't aggressive, but they're dominant in their energy. Women sense it instantly. It's not what they see on paper, it's what they feel in the room. This is why good men, morally sound, emotionally generous, genuinely loving men, often find themselves abandoned, ignored, or left questioning what went wrong. It wasn't their character that failed. It was their understanding of the invisible mechanics at play. They played the wrong game. They brought empathy to a war of instincts. They expected mutual reciprocity in a landscape driven by primal hierarchy. Women may appreciate goodness, but they crave power. And power, in this context, means internal sovereignty. It means the ability to say no without apology, to walk away without threat, and to exist fully without permission. These are the men women admire from a distance, test when they get close, and ultimately submit to without realizing why. It's not manipulation. It's not cruelty. It's gravitational. It is the presence of a man who will not be conquered emotionally or psychologically, and that presence creates safety not through words but through energy. He does not bend to be liked. He does not plead to be seen. And that refusal, that stillness in the face of emotional storms, creates the magnetic pull that no words can replicate. There exists a paradox within modern dating dynamics that few dare to acknowledge, let alone dissect. On the surface, women will declare they want emotional availability, transparency, and vulnerability from men. They will praise softness, encourage men to cry, to open up, to be real. But when these same men begin to practice what has been preached, when they become emotionally expressive, when they lead with sensitivity rather than stoicism, something inexplicable happens. The attraction slowly dies. The respect begins to erode, And soon, the same man who was once adored for his gentle nature becomes dismissed, devalued, or friend-zoned. This contradiction isn't hypocrisy, it's biology meeting psychology. It's the clash between what women believe they want and what they are actually drawn to on a deeper, unconscious level. Women are not lying when they ask for emotional connection. They do want to feel seen and heard, but what they will never admit is that they want that connection to come from a man who remains fundamentally untouchable. Not emotionally dead, not distant, but stable, grounded, unmoved by their emotional fluctuations. He sees them, but he doesn't bend. He feels their storms, but doesn't get swept into them. That presence, that emotional immovability, creates a polarity that allows her to feel safe and, more importantly, drawn toward him. Men who misunderstand this dynamic often find themselves trapped in a painful cycle. They meet a woman, listen to her, empathize with her, open themselves up. She praises him for his sensitivity. She thanks him for being different, and for a brief time it works. But as the man leans more into this identity, confiding, doubting, over-communicating, he begins to drift from what actually stirred her attraction in the first place. She stops texting as much. She starts testing him more. She may even begin talking about needing space, or that something feels off. What she's really feeling is the evaporation of the masculine container she once subconsciously trusted. Here's the brutal truth: most women are biologically drawn to men who make them feel contained. Not controlled, not dominated, but held mentally, emotionally, energetically. This containment doesn't come from being emotionally needy or reactive. It comes from the opposite: being calm, centered, and consistent regardless of what she's feeling or doing. Emotional availability without emotional discipline becomes emotional chaos. And chaos, when emanating from the man, kills attraction. Women want to express emotion. They want to be free in their feminine essence. But that freedom requires a structure, and the structure is the masculine presence that doesn't dissolve under pressure. This is why women test men. Not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. They test to feel if the man will break, if he will react, chase, plead, or lose control. Every test is a question. Are you still grounded? The man who can remain composed, even when misunderstood, even when insulted, even when tempted to explain himself endlessly. That man passes the test not with words, but with energy. And that energy is what creates real attraction. Not the flowers, not the compliments, not the vulnerability. It's the silent assertion of self. In the modern world, are punished for this kind of strength. It is mischaracterized as toxic, outdated, or egotistical. But make no mistake, it is the very thing that distinguishes the man who is chosen from the man who is tolerated. Emotional presence is a gift, but it must be accompanied by emotional mastery. A man who loses himself trying to be loved will always lose the love he worked so hard to earn, because love cannot be earned by collapsing into someone else's emotional world. It is kept by standing firm in your own. What women cannot articulate, but will always respond to, is the rare man who feels like a mountain, a man whose approval must be earned, a man who listens but does not beg, who understands her emotions, does not chase them, who stays centered in his truth, no matter what storm she brings. That man doesn't need to convince her of his worth. She feels it the moment he enters the room. And that feeling, more than any words he could say, what makes him unforgettable. There's a silent war playing out in modern relationships, a war between image and instinct, between what we show to the world and what we quietly respond to behind closed doors. In this war, have developed a refined ability, often unconscious, to assess men not by their words or their claims, but by their behavior under pressure. Not the pressure of life, but the pressure of intimacy, of rejection, of emotional vulnerability. What many men fail to realize is that their value is not determined by how much they adore her or how far they're willing to go to prove themselves, by how much of themselves they are unwilling to lose in the process. This is where the hidden dynamic unfolds. Men who overly pursue validation from women, who make her the center of their emotional world, often find themselves disrespected, dismissed, or worse, emasculated. The tragedy is that these men often operate from sincerity. They think devotion will win her heart. They believe that self-sacrifice and emotional transparency will be seen as strength. But in reality, they often awaken something in her that she can't explain, but instinctively recoils from emotional dependence masquerading as love. She may not say it aloud. She may not even fully understand it herself. She begins to feel the weight of a man who is leaning on her emotionally, instead of holding his own weight. When a man abandons his own center to orbit around a woman's emotional landscape, she stops seeing him as the grounded force she once admired. She begins to feel that she is the leader of the emotional ship, that she must steer both her storms and his. And that burden, while rarely verbalized, causes fatigue, distance, and eventually disconnection. She wanted a partner, not a project, a mountain, not a mirror. And so, attraction dies, not with a bang, but with a slow, internal drift she doesn't fully understand. This is the brutal truth. A man loses his power the moment he makes a woman his compass. When he starts checking her reactions for validation, molding himself to avoid conflict, or betraying his own standards to be chosen, he transforms from a man into a shapeshifter. And women may like the attention, they may momentarily feel special, but deep down, they begin to question the authenticity of the man in front of them. Because if he will abandon his own truth to keep her, then who is he really? Real attraction, sustained, magnetic, and visceral, is not born from agreement or compliance. It is born from tension, from polarity, from the electricity that arises when a man stands firm in his truth, even when it risks her disapproval. This doesn't mean being unkind or cold. It means being self-possessed. It means speaking your mind with calm certainty, even if it disrupts the emotional comfort of the moment. It means having principles you don't bend, standards you don't lower, and a mission you don't abandon just to be accepted. This kind of man creates a very different energy. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He doesn't perform emotional acrobatics to avoid being misunderstood. He simply is grounded, focused, selective. And that selectivity, that refusal to be emotionally manipulated or guilted into submission, signals something profound to a woman's subconscious. This man is rare. This man has value. This man could walk away, and that possibility forces her to evaluate him with reverence, not entitlement. What women will never admit is that the men they most crave are the ones who make them work for connection. Not through games or cruelty, but by refusing to be emotionally captured. These men create desire by embodying self-respect. They don't have to prove their worth. Their very presence says, I'm already worthy. You can join me, I won't chase you to keep you. And that silent confidence, unspoken but deeply felt, is the ultimate aphrodisiac in a world full of men asking to be loved rather than demanding to be respected. There is a truth men stumble upon far too late. Women respond not to what you say you are, but to what your life reflects about who you actually are. While many men believe that showcasing potential, future promises, or grand intentions will stir admiration and love, the truth is that women are neurologically and emotionally wired to respond to proof, to presence, to power that's visible, not discussed. And power in this sense isn't money alone. It's not status by itself. It's deeper. It's about how rooted a man is in his reality, how immovable he is in his self-worth, how stable his energy is under pressure, and how unwilling he is to chase what doesn't choose him. What women will never say out loud, but what shapes their every decision, is that a man's identity must exist independent of her. If a woman senses that your confidence crumbles when she pulls away, if she notices that your emotional state depends on her approval, she will instinctively retreat. Why? Because she doesn't want to carry the emotional responsibility of being your anchor. She wants to feel the masculine weight of a man who does not need her to feel whole. And ironically, the more a man emotionally detaches from needing a woman to validate him, the more that woman becomes intrigued, drawn in by the enigma, the sovereignty, the unavailability that implies immense internal value. This is not about playing games. It's not about acting cold or manipulating her with distance. It's about genuine emotional discipline. It's about a man who refuses to make anyone, including her, his emotional oxygen. Women, particularly those in tune with their own feminine nature, want to feel like they've been chosen by a man who doesn't need to choose anyone. That choice must feel earned, not handed out in desperation or romantic idealism. She must feel like he's capable of walking away. That if she misuses his presence, it will remove it not out of spite, but out of principle. This is the brutal equation most men never solve. The more accessible your heart is to someone who hasn't proven they deserve it, the more likely it is to be discarded. When you give your emotional loyalty without demanding anything in return, without holding your ground, you invite disrespect. Because people, by nature, don't value what's cheap. And in today's culture of constant validation, a man's ability to withhold his attention is a rare form of power. It's not cruelty, control, and it's this control that creates magnetism. He doesn't lash out, he doesn't beg, he doesn't unravel, he observes, he withdraws, he watches. Women never speak of this openly because to do so would expose the instinct. They don't fully understand themselves. They test not to ruin the man, but to confirm whether he can stand up to the chaos they know they carry. In every woman lives a storm, a psychological and emotional complexity that seeks structure, that seeks direction. And when she pushes, when she provokes, when she doubts, She's not hoping you fail. She's hoping you won't collapse. She's hoping you won't become reactive. She's hoping that, finally, there's a man who can remain calm in the fire she doesn't know how to control. It's not her words that reveal this dynamic. It's her actions. She won't thank you for being indifferent. She won't tell you directly that your absence increased your value. But she will suddenly check your stories. Suddenly text again. Suddenly ask if you're seeing someone new. Because on a subconscious level, she's realized something vital. She lost something that didn't need her. And that realization cuts deeper than any rejection. In the world of male-female dynamics, the man who is respected always comes before the man who is loved. Because love without respect is fragile, conditional, and temporary. When a woman respects you, truly respects you, her behavior changes. She softens, she listens, she recalibrates, and she begins to see you not as an option, as a presence she's afraid to lose. Not because you manipulated her, but because you mastered yourself. There's a terrifying truth men must face if they want to stop being disposable in the eyes of women. They are judged, silently and constantly, by how much chaos they can carry without falling apart. What women never say, but constantly test for, is the strength of a man's internal frame. Not strength as in muscle, not strength as in financial dominance, but strength as in emotional gravity, the ability to stay grounded when everything around him is pulling at his attention, his pride. That's what consciously, not maliciously, but biologically and psychologically. A man who collapses into emotional reactivity, who explains himself endlessly, who tries to convince a woman of his worth is seen not as noble, but as weak. It begins in the smallest moments. A delayed text, a passive-aggressive comment, a subtle withdrawal of affection. She won't tell you it's a test, but it is. She's measuring your emotional temperature, seeing if you'll flinch, if you beg, if you apologize for being you. Because the moment you do, the moment you try to restore her comfort by compromising your core, she loses something vital: trust. Not trust in your loyalty, but trust in your backbone. Trust that you're solid enough to carry the weight of reality, not just the fantasy. Once that trust erodes, the attraction dies, slowly, quietly, but permanently. Here's the thing most men don't understand. Women do not crave a man who is perfectly agreeable. They crave a man who is sovereign, a man who does not need to be liked to do what is right, a man who doesn't hesitate to walk away from what insults his soul. That kind of man is rare. That kind of man is dangerous. That kind of man activates a woman's deepest instincts, not to control, but to surrender. And yes, most modern women will never admit this, because admitting it would mean acknowledging that their independence is not enough to override their nature. That even in their most empowered state, they still long for a man who doesn't fear their storms. But a sovereign man is not cruel. He's not cold. He's clear. And that clarity is unsettling to those who seek to manipulate through confusion. Women, like anyone, fear transparency when they've been surviving in a world of emotional performance. So when a man arrives who speaks directly, who acts with intention, who does not bend to win approval, it throws everything into disarray. She doesn't know whether to fight him, follow him, or run. And that inner conflict is what makes him unforgettable. Because he's not just another man orbiting her need for attention. He's his own planet, his own system. And whether she likes it or not, she starts revolving around him. Now let's be brutally honest. Many women today are not prepared for this kind of man, because he doesn't just challenge their behavior, he challenges their identity. He forces them to choose between staying in control or feeling something real, between manipulating outcomes or risking vulnerability. And that choice terrifies them, because most have never experienced it. They've only known men who worship them, who fold under pressure, who lose themselves in the chase. But this man watches, he listens, and he leaves if he must. Not with anger, but with peace. Because his life was full before she arrived, and it will remain full after she leaves. He's the mirror she didn't ask for but desperately needed. He reflects not just what she is, but what she's not ready to be. And in that reflection, something stirs: respect, curiosity, fear, lust, all tangled into one. That's what makes him unforgettable. Not the compliments, not the promises, but the silence that followed his withdrawal. The strength he showed when tested, the boundaries he enforced without raising his voice. These are the things women never say aloud, but always remember. Not because they want to, because they can't forget. The truth that women will never admit about men isn't hidden in their words. It's buried in their reactions, in their silence, in the way they retreat when a man stands firm instead of folding. Most men spend their lives trying to be good enough, likable enough, selfless enough, hoping that effort will buy them love, loyalty, and respect. But what they fail to realize is that love, true feminine love, is not given to the man who begs for it. It is reserved for the man who commands it, quietly, firmly, unapologetically. In a world where men are being softened, sedated, and stripped of their masculine edge, it is vital to remember women do not want men who echo their emotions. They want men who anchor them. Not because women are weak, because the feminine craves polarity, and in the absence of masculine strength, direction, and internal certainty, women are forced to lead. And that, over time, breeds resentment they'll never vocalize. So here is the brutal truth: if you want respect, stop chasing validation. If you want desire, stop negotiating your masculinity. If you want loyalty, stop making your presence a question. Be a man who speaks less, moves with clarity, holds the line, and walks away when he must, not to punish, but to preserve his value. Because the moment you make your worth conditional on someone else's approval, you've already lost everything. Women will never admit it. They don't have to, because their behavior always speaks louder than their words. And once you understand that, once you stop asking them to explain what they don't even consciously understand, you'll finally start living not as a man desperate to be chosen, but as a man who chooses. That is where your power begins. Not in becoming what they want, but in becoming what they can't control.